come on in and have a seat. If you didn't hear all my jokes yesterday, I have the same ones today. So we can either wait for everybody else to show up or start, and we'll wait. I'm just kidding. We're starting. We're going to go ahead. Everybody in this room is important, and we appreciate you taking the time out to come to this. So we really want to thank our sponsor for this session, which is Carbotech. And we'll come on up and do our introduction.
Good morning. My name is Bruce Kicklighter. I represent Autolog and Carbotech, and both companies have been working together in this industry for 35 years, log and lumber handling equipment, scanning, optimization, and controls. And this morning it is my honor to introduce Dr. Tom Goldsby. He is the co-faculty director for the Global Supply Chain Institute at the University of Tennessee, Haslam College of Business.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate Carbotech Autolog for supporting this session today. Also, thanks to Dallin and Renee for inviting me to be here with you today. And I think I'll be brief because, having spent the past day and change with you, it seems like everyone's got their supply chains pretty much in tip-top shape, got your issues licked, and it's all good, right? Well, now, if you'll allow me a little bit of time, I'll share some perspectives that I think are relevant to your industry and beyond. Supply chains are certainly very far-reaching, and it's just been incredible the last few years. My own kids who are now in their 20s, for more than a decade, when people would ask them what their dad did, they would say he teaches logistics and supply chain management. And they'd use these little air quote things as if it was something I made up. So now, if there's been any benefit to the last couple of years, it's that they've removed the air quotes and maybe have a little sense of pride that their dad is a supply chain professor. So yes, I'm coming to you from the University of Tennessee, beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee, and I serve as the Dee and Jimmy Haslam Chair in Logistics, and I believe Dee and Jimmy are probably pretty happy today based on what took place across the street yesterday. They are the owners of the Cleveland Browns, and I think they're a little more concerned about the personnel they have over there than back on campus, but we've got a long, proud tradition in supply chain management at UT. If you can believe it, supply chain management is the biggest major at the University of Tennessee. We have 1,500 students, undergraduates that are majoring in supply chain. We have another 500 graduate students that are studying supply chain intensely, and so I've been there only 3 years. I joined the faculty from the Ohio State University 3 years ago, but it's great to be down there being involved with what we're doing. So again, kudos to this organization and sponsors for bringing you all together. I love these opportunities to get together and learn about a different sector of the economy where I've been certainly a user, consumer of your products, but it's not until I immerse myself with you and have conversations like I've had in the last day or so to better understand the issues that you face and the opportunities that lie ahead. So with regard to this topic, planes, trains, supply chains, I'd like to lay out my agenda in three different areas. We're going to level set just a little bit, and then we'll get into the current state, and then I'll try to offer some future state perspectives. And hey, let me know. It's fine if you're in full agreement with what I'm offering and serving up. That's fine. But I really want to have the opportunity to learn. So bring forward the questions and even the challenges. I welcome those as well. If you've got any points of clarification along the way, or you see a picture and you want a little more description, don't hesitate to hold me up. Otherwise, I'll push on and we'll have some time at the end of the hour for some questions. With regard to the level set, let me first just start off with the absolute fundamental. What is a supply chain? Because that is highly debatable in its own right. And I refer to a supply chain as the network of companies that works together to provide a good or service for the end-use market. So there's someone at the end of this so-called chain that's using, consuming, experiencing products. And I really loved in the earlier session talking about the Hardwood Coalition and the focus on the consumer. everybody's efforts in the supply chain should be directed toward creating value in the eyes of those folks at the end of the supply chain. So when I hear your efforts to market to consumers, that is critically important. Okay, it's not just marketing to your next stage customers who might be manufacturers, distributors, what have you. It's recognizing that someone's at the end of this chain, this series of business-to-business relationships that wants to generate value in the products that you're helping to feed with your stock. So just a little bit of a level set there. Let me just talk about how we win through supply chain excellence. It's what I refer to as the Bill of Rights. It's maybe not the one you studied in school, the one that comes up from time to time in political converse, but here we're talking about the Bill of Rights that speaks of delivering the right product to the right place, the right time, in the right quantity, the right condition, at the right price. And another term that we refer to is the perfect order. And perhaps your business measures the perfect order. The perfect order means the provision of all those rights, plus handling any customer inquiries or concerns, addressing those issues in a prompt and satisfactory manner to the customer. It can also involve some things like accurate invoicing, billing, things like that, okay? That everything is right in the eyes of the customer. And it's really difficult to achieve that in the individual transaction. But trying to do it day in and day out, it's an incredible struggle, and particularly with what we've experienced these past 3 years. And so delivering the perfect order time and time again to win over customers, and then I've got that ... piece, while still making healthy margins to grow the business. And that has been particularly challenging, not just to deliver according to the Bill of Rights, but also that ... piece, making money at the end of the day, particularly given that everything is costing more right now. So that's really what we're trying to do through supply chain excellence. Often when I'm teaching supply chain, I say, hey, it's a very simple proposition. We want to balance our supply and demand. We want to meet the demand that's out there without having undue excess inventory, undue excess capacity. And that's been incredibly difficult. As I point out, this balance has been way out of whack over the past 2 years. But I still like to set up the conversation by virtue of talking. You've got demand over here on the one hand, and you've got your inventory and your capacity on the other hand, and trying to keep those things in sync. But demand has been anything but static. You know, I'll show you some graphs that you're probably all very familiar with, certainly within your businesses as well as across the industry, that speak to tremendous growth that you've experienced, particularly as we were all stuck at home for work, play, school, and everything in between, and we demanded more stuff. And fortunately for you, and also unfortunately for you, a lot of that involved hardwood. It involved your raw supply feeding that machine. Also, I'll just point out that there's this very subtle thing also in this diagram that I'll talk about a little bit more toward the end of my comments, and that's that P term that's in the triangle, the plan. And something that we found extremely valuable working with companies into the throes of the pandemic and throughout the pandemic is their ability to plan faster and to some extent have their fingers on the pulse of what was moving and what was not moving. So it's a very subtle part of the depiction here, but I'm going to come back and talk about that a little bit later as I talk about supply chain agility, because it's not just about making your operations more nimble, but it's also speeding up your planning cycle so you're not using 30, 60, or 90-day forecasts to drive your operations. And I'll just give you some examples a little bit later about how we were helping companies to become more nimble in their planning as well as their operations. So a principle that occurs to me that I need to share with you at this point, and it's something that you all have probably experienced at various parts of your career, which by the way, I'm blown away when I come to an industry meeting and I see these tags that say 20-year member, 30-year member, 40-year member, And I learned earlier there's some 100-year members to this organization, which blows me away. You got to be doing some stuff right to have 30, 40-year members. But 100-year members? Just blown away by that. Well, anyway, something that your organizations have been experiencing, perhaps experiencing right now, is something called the bullwhip effect. And I've been doing a lot of media lately. I was just talking to Automotive News yesterday about the bullwhip effect that's occurring in automotive supply chains. And there's this MIT professor, really smart guy by the name of Jay Forrester. And you can't read it probably in the back of the room there. But back in 1958, he chronicled, he captured this thing called the bullwhip effect. And let me explain how this works. I mentioned earlier, supply chains are all about creating value in the eyes of the end users at the end of the chain. What happens if they decide, hey, I really like that product, and they start coming in droves, and they increase their demand at retail, which is where they're buying stuff, by 10%? Pretty modest increase, right? Well, what do you think the retailer then has to do? It takes them probably a little bit of time to realize, oh, this product's pretty hot. We're burning through the inventory, maybe getting into our safety stocks. We need to up our orders a little bit. And so they increase their orders, not by 10%, but they don't know that 10% is going to level off as it did, right? They just see an uptick in demand, and so they increase their orders on the distributor by 16%. Now, imagine you're that distributor. Demand just went up how much? 16%. Whoa, this stuff's getting hot. We're burning through our safety stock. You step up your orders on the manufacturer's distribution center by 28%. Now imagine you're at that distribution center. Demand just went up 28%. What are you doing? You got to hurry up. You got to react. You got to increase your orders on the manufacturer. Dr. Forrester found that manufacturers saw a 40% increase in their output when they received the 28% increase from the distribution center. Now, I'm just capturing, this is as far as Jay Forrester went upstream to the manufacturer. You all are feeding manufacturers, right? Does that curve, does it get smaller? Does it dampen? No, it gets amplified. It gets bigger. So I'm just imagining what you all have experienced in these last couple of years as these dynamics have made their way up. Notice what you see here is a lag in response as that demand signal has to go upstream, one tier, one level at a time. And then also what turns out to be an overreaction because we're speculating. Given our operational lead times, we know that we can't respond to a 10% increase in consumer demand with just a 10% increase. If we think that demand is going to continue to tick upward, we got to try to get ahead of it, right? We got to try to make up. Notice also what happens is there's the big drop-off that then happens. Like, what happened to all that demand? Well, it's because it was an overreaction to what was going on. There's actual increase in demand of 10% at the end of the chain, and everyone else is just kind of building up stock, anticipating it's something huge. What happens when your demand at retail goes up by more than 10%? Well, these factors all get amplified even further. Jay Forrester identified this 1958, 64 years ago. Do you think this effect is still alive and well today, despite the technologies we do have available? It is. It is. That's why I'm doing interviews routinely for Automotive News and NBC News and all these folks, because it is very hard to achieve ultimately that balance between supply and demand, particularly when we have long lead times, particularly when our supply chains stretch across oceans and involve weeks or even months in order to meet our own needs, to in turn meet our customer demand. So the bullwhip effect increases as you head up the supply chain and as you folks are near the point of raw material extraction, timbering, processing lumber, preparing that lumber for use. You're going to experience this even more dramatically than what Mr. Forrester suggested. So as I said, that is your reality. And also, the question I get, hey, professor, you're showing what happens when there's an increase in demand. What happens if there's a decrease in demand? the same general tendency. You'll have a lag in recognition of that change in demand, and then often an overreaction. It's a little more amplified on the upside than the downside, but still the same basic circumstance phenomenon occurs, whether there's an increase or decrease in demand. So again, a lesson from 1958 that still resonates today, and maybe even more so given the extended nature of the supply chains in which we find ourselves. So again, have had a lot of opportunity to offer industry commentary on the subject of supply chains the last couple of years. Myself and a couple of my colleagues at UT, we put together a piece for the Wall Street Journal that ran in June 14, 2021. So a little more than a year ago, we said, caution, bullwhip effect ahead. And so we're telling the industry out there, hey, beware, we think maybe, in this case, demand is going to temper because we thought that we were getting a handle on COVID. And you'll see in a moment, something I've come to appreciate is that as COVID goes, so go our supply chains. They hamstring our operations such that supply is challenged, but meanwhile, demand is amplified because people are at home wanting goods. Goods are more supply chain intensive than services. So we thought we were getting a handle on this. Vaccines were getting in people's arms, and we were feeling pretty confident. And then the Delta variant came along last summer. And things went in opposite directions. Demand continued to go up. Supply continued to go down or be very challenged. And so we were off. We were off. In May 19, 2022, just earlier this year, about 4 months ago, the Wall Street Journal then ran another piece that said, okay, now the bullwhip effect is happening. So we were just off by a year. And so keep that in mind as I offer more comments that might involve a forward-looking nature. I've got a sense for maybe what's going to happen. It's just I can be way off. And again, the reason we were off is because we didn't see Delta and then subsequently Omicron coming along. But we were concerned that companies were ordering, just trying to provide that customer experience that the diabolical consumer out there is demanding. And we're like, it's gonna temper. It's gonna level off at some point. And we thought it was gonna be back in the summer of 21. It's more likely the summer of 22. So just keep that in mind. All right, so current state, bringing us up to where we are. So what are some major forces shaping North American-based supply chains today? As I said earlier, our supply chains are stretching around the world, and for all the talk of reshoring operations or nearshoring operations, particularly for manufacturing, the data don't seem to suggest that that's happening in large measure. It is, it's great. Semiconductors are being produced here. Just down in Columbus, there was shovels and dirt breaking ground for that big new Intel fabrication plant. So we see some examples that are very promising, but on a broad scale, I say supply chains are not shrinking, they're not simplifying, or returning home en masse. If we were to look out 40 years from now, it could be a very different story perhaps, but I think for the next 5 years, 10 years, our supply chains are our supply chains. We're gonna have to figure out how to navigate within them. Something that has changed a bit is going back to the tariffs that went into place, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we started to see the China plus one strategy. So if the US government's going to put high tariffs on Chinese imports, companies started looking at ways to bypass China. They didn't bring those operations to the States, to North America, or even to the region. They went to places like Vietnam, Indonesia. Okay, they went to other low-cost country locations in that region, continued to stretch our supply chains. Maybe a little less dependence on China, and we are seeing that for sure, but not necessarily bringing those operations back to the region. That's a much longer play, and it's going to need a lot more time of duress and pain, frankly, felt on behalf of businesses for those operations to come back. The economics just aren't there yet. Consumers demanded more stuff, as I mentioned, particularly durable goods, which is what you all are supporting. And durable goods are the most supply chain intensive businesses we have. And so that put a lot of stress on our domestic transportation networks, our warehouse networks, our ports, the shipping lines, even air cargo. All of our supply chains were taken beyond the brink. They were really designed to manage about plus or minus 10% volatility. And when you're putting the demands on the system that we've seen the last couple of years, it greatly overshot that. I became a little bit of a celebrity around the University of Tennessee campus about a year ago as people were starting to get concerned about whether or not Santa Claus was going to deliver. As the ports started to stack up outside Long Beach, LA, and San Pedro Bay, and I found myself on NBC Nightly News, Meet the Press, and these places. And I talked to Miguel Almaguer. Some of you might watch NBC News and know he's a very common reporter, appears just about every night. I had about a 6-minute conversation with Miguel as he was out in a boat running around the bay. What they ended up running was a 3-second quip where I said, it's like the python that tried to swallow the alligator. That's what's going on with our supply chains right now, and that's what they ran with. But just to underscore, again, we're just trying to force way more volume than the system was ever designed to accommodate. That resulted in exorbitant prices, a lot of price taking in logistics in particular, and also long delays and waits to get that stuff on the ship, off the ship. It also occurs to me that you all, again, help me with this word. It's one I don't run into very often in my business. I think the word is export. It's kind of a vague notion. I seem to have studied it back in school. You all are kind of running things a little bit opposite the way most of the folks I talk to that are dependent on import supply chains. You all are dependent on exports. And those two things go hand in hand, right? If we've got containers, ships and containers that can't get into port, circulate those containers, get them back to port, that causes some real issues for you folks. I can recognize where you exporters out there have been very challenged by this stuff too. I mentioned this earlier. As COVID goes, so go our supply chains. I've already touched on that one. And then you add in the vagaries of Russian invasion of Ukraine, fulfilling the military term here, VUCA world prophecy, which means we're living in a world with greater volatility, greater uncertainty, greater complexity, and greater ambiguity. And that's a term that the military has been using for some time. We've started to adopt it. There's also the term that former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld dropped on us called black swan events and unknown unknowns. And that's what we've been facing as well in the last couple of years. Incredible uncertainty, and I don't think that uncertainty is going away anytime soon, sadly. And as I pointed out, in terms of making those margins I talked about earlier, really tough, even if you are successful in getting a price increase through to your customers, which, by the way, the last 6 months, 12 months, hope you got your price increases. We're able to cover, but everything's costing more. Everything. Labor, land, materials, equipment, CapEx financing, right? The Fed just earlier this week raising the interbank lending 0.75 points, and I hear that they're probably going to raise it another, maybe half point before the end of the year. Perhaps even half point on 2 different occasions. So be ready for that. Also, transportation across all modes has been costing more. Warehousing rents, fuel, energy, ... Okay, everything is costing more. Also, something I've noticed about transportation, I continue, it's great to be out and about and traveling again. And I don't buy industrial transportation, but I buy a lot of airline tickets. And it's been remarkable to me. I watch fuel, I watch oil prices, I watch fuel prices, and of course I buy airline tickets which say, prices is going up, yes, because we got to hire more pilots and we got to train them, we got to hire more staff, but it's fuel. That's the second biggest line item on most carriers' operating expense list. But we do have that, what they call the rockets and feathers situation out there, where price goes up really fast and then it floats down like a feather, you know. And I'm watching, fuel prices are fortunately coming down, but it doesn't seem like prices for transportation services are coming down in kind. So expect to continue paying out the nose there. I was talking to Steve of BPM Lumber earlier. There's Steve. What are you saying? Can I share with you, how much were you paying for per mile for coverage earlier this year? $5 a mile. Just mind-blowing, mind-blowing. Now $3.25, so it's going in the right direction. You must be a pretty good negotiator to get it back down to where, frankly, it should be. You have to ask, twist arms to make it happen. Hey, I was on the flight here yesterday. I was looking through some industry literature. I came across a spanking new survey out of the National Association of Manufacturers. They do a quarterly survey of their membership, and these would be your customers. Okay, so they ask them about the top 10 primary current business challenges. And I couldn't help but notice supply chain pretty well represented here. Number one, supply chain challenges, 78% of respondents, that's their number one challenge. Increased raw materials costs came in very close behind at 76.1%. Attracting and retaining quality workforce, also at 76.1%. And then fourth, transportation and logistics costs at 66%. So I guess that's why supply chain folks are in demand and under duress right now. It's being at the Rock Hall last night, I saw a tribute to Meatloaf, and he talked about 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Here, I guess we've got 3 out of the top 4 attributed to supply chains. So just amazing to me just how pressing these challenges are. A metric that we often use to kind of get a general read on the health of our supply chains, how well we're doing at the macroeconomic level across the nation of balancing supply and demand, is something called the inventory to sales ratio. And it's taken at retail. And you see that huge spikes that jumps right off the chart. That's when we started to get into COVID. And so that would have been Q1 of 2020. And then it dawned on everybody, oh, we're going to be using and consuming a lot more stuff at home. And you can see how we rapidly burned through inventory and got down to levels that, frankly, we had never seen ever since this metric's been gathered by the U.S. Census Bureau. And we're sitting now about 1.30. What that means is that at retail, they're sitting on about 30% more inventory than they expect to sell within the course of a month. And that's a pretty healthy number. As you can kind of look at a trend there, about 1.35 is where the retailers are feeling comfortable. However, as noted, this doesn't mean that you have the right stuff on hand. And this has been a major issue among retailers. Walmart, Target, a whole host of other folks continue to bring products onshore, get them distributed throughout their distribution network, get them to stores, and then what's happened, there's been a pivot, and that pivot has been attributed to inflation. Also, I think the pivot might be attributed to the fact that a lot of people feel they've got enough stuff, consumer electronics, what have you. They've kind of stocked up on that stuff over the last couple of years and full up. I don't know how many Peloton bikes you need, as another example, right? And Peloton's kind of fallen off a cliff by virtue of everyone kind of having their fill of those bikes, and now they're becoming the clothes racks, as the old exercise equipment tends to become. But 1.30 is tending to suggest, hey, maybe things are starting to stabilize a little bit. But again, it doesn't mean that you got the right stuff in stock. Going to some other Census Bureau stats. This is one I thought you all would find interesting. I wouldn't be surprised in the past couple of days this has come up. These are new housing starts, looking back at the last 4 years. And hey, it's been pretty hot coming out of COVID. And but you do see the tendency there. Things are tailing off a little bit, and probably pretty directly related to the rise in interest rates and Fed action there. Right? Also, furniture industry new orders over that same time period, over the last 4 years and change. Hey, this one's looking pretty robust. So this is manufacturers' new orders, furniture and related products. And again, I got to believe hardwoods are featured primarily. They should be anyway. So anyway, this is some encouraging news, and that's in millions of dollars. So it's showing domestically you're looking about $6.4 billion industry there, and I like the slope of that curve there toward the right. Look in another area. These are data that come from Harvard. They have a research center dedicated to household remodeling. And this one's a little bit tricky to read because it's looking not only at the current reads, which would be up through Q2 of 2022, that kind of darker set of bar graphs with the $405 billion read for domestic remodels. It is ticking upward, but at a decreasing rate. And they look out to this same quarter a year from now. In future projection, they suggest that that's going to tail off a bit. So some pretty encouraging news, but again, the projection is a bit challenged, according to the Harvard folks. Also, I think ultimately we look at producer price index to get a read on supply demand within hardwoods. And again, this is coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It says, wow, it's been quite a boom period for your industry. But notice some suggestion of some headwinds ahead as in these last couple of months, the reads have showed a little bit downward trajectory there, but maybe that's welcome to some extent. Okay, so out of all of this, what we have started to see is greater appreciation, maybe a new appreciation for what we call the end-to-end supply chain. Recognizing, as I often say, hey, your supply chain doesn't begin at your receiving dock and end at your shipping dock. This recognition of interdependence that you have up and down this chain, this network of businesses working together to provide a good or service, ultimately for those consumers and customers at the end of the chain. So let's just break it down. Okay, I know that we've got people that are very close to raw material extraction and processing and milling. We've also got some manufacturers in the room. We've got some distributors. So regardless of where you are, I think that we need to be thinking about internal supply chain as well as upstream and downstream. With regard to downstream, looking at things that I'm hearing in terms of your ability to serve customers. These are a lot of things to pick up and put down here, so I'll just allow you to kind of read through it. But a lot of things in terms about surges in demand, followed by decline. Things get super hot, and then they cool off a little bit. Certainly a lot of anxiety out there. If we look at the end consumer, consumer sentiment research that's been done at the University of Michigan for more than 60 years shows that consumer sentiment is at all-time lows according to their measure, but people are still spending. So kind of their attitudes, one thing, actions are yet another. Spending continues to be quite robust. Now, things are costing more, and that's being reflected in spending, but there's no doubt that we're seeing some pivot. Okay, we're seeing some pivot from goods to services, yes, but we're also seeing pivots within the goods, the things that folks are buying. So I'm not as pessimistic as what that consumer sentiment would suggest. I'm actually quite bullish. And I'm finding whether it's industry surveys or consumer surveys capturing attitudes, there's a real downbeat mood right now. And I'm kind of that guy that steps in and says, hey, let's step back a little bit. I thought the world was going to implode, 2.5 years ago. it didn't happen. Now, $3 trillion of stimulus helped to prevent that from happening, no doubt. A lot of money in a lot of people's pockets, and they spent it. Helped us to avoid imminent disaster for our economy. And I would say, looking back on it, yeah, we're going to be paying for it for a long time, no doubt. But I think it kept us out of a tremendous, tremendous hole. You're looking at the guy, I mentioned earlier, I was wrong about that bullwhip effect and its timing. I'm also the guy that lost money on real estate in 2020. All right? I sold my house for less than I bought it for in Dublin, Ohio, 9 years earlier. Take that to the bank, but I thought we were headed toward imminent economic danger. Didn't happen, so I'm pretty optimistic, when I take account of where we are and where we're going. Customers, I think the appetite is still whetted. They're still excited and out there and spending, just spending in a little bit different ways. Looking at internal operations, this is all about labor, labor, labor. Okay, regardless of the nature of your business, it could be in production, distribution, milling, wherever you are, labor is the challenge. And that graph that I've got on the board there shows that labor participation rate is not yet where it was pre-COVID. It's making its way back, particularly as those incentives, in some cases incentives to stay home, which those serve the purpose of trying to tamp down the spread of the virus, but also, again, incentives for many people not to return to the workforce. And so we're not quite back to where we were pre-COVID, and we've got a ways to go. And also, we're finding there's incredible turnover. There's some change in attitude we're seeing in the workforce, particularly the new workforce, about showing up to a job for day 2, for instance. All right, with regard to upstream, and again, your upstream is a little bit different. If this is your upstream for buying equipment, that you're concerned about imports there and the backups at the ports and disrupted operations overseas. But I recognize that this, for many of you, comes back to bite you in terms of export activity. Again, what goes out what goes in must come back out in the way of port activity. And so you might be feeling some of these pressures as it relates to getting product out to export markets. I've got the ILWU there, the West Coast Labor Union for Ports. Just point out that they've not yet struck the deal with the Pacific Maritime Administration, but they're continuing to operate out there. I do think that they're going to reach a deal, just as last week the railroad unions reached a deal with the rail operators. And I think the situation is right now, no one wants to be blamed for shutting down our supply chains. And so that's very much to our benefit. With supply chain recognition so much higher now than it was previously, no one wants to get the blame for Santa not able to deliver this holiday season. So going back to that National Association of Manufacturers survey that just came out, they asked their respondents, when will supply chain disruptions abate? And you see different expectations, and I kind of broke it down in these 3 big chunks that some think soon. For 2% of the respondents, they say it already has improved. So goody for those 2%. Another 2.3% think it's going to be in this quarter, which is almost over. And 6.5% think it'll be in Q4. So you're looking at, about 11% think it's going to be soon or already has happened. Most think next year. So what is that? About 61% think it's going to be maybe first half of the year, others the second half of the year. And then, meanwhile, we've got about 29% that's like they're just kind of throwing up their hands, and they don't know what to think. 2024 and beyond, or just I'm not putting down a guess on it. And it's really difficult for me to answer this question on a broad basis. I think it really depends upon the nature of your supply chains and what you're looking at. But on a broad basis, I think we have seen some stability. I mentioned that VUCA world. I think we're going to be presented with challenges that maybe we haven't even anticipated yet. But I do think that there's an aptitude, there's an agility that we find in organizations to deal with these uncertainties much, much better now than catching us flat-footed in 2020. So looking ahead, no doubt a word cloud here with just a lot of different concepts, but I'll just summarize it to say it seems like demands are increasing. Customers are saying, where's my stuff? They're no less demanding, relenting on these things. They want more and better services. They want visibility and transparency in the integrity of the product, and that's understandable. They are looking for reliable delivery times, in some case pressure to reduce the lead times, and as pointed out earlier, costs are up. So increased vulnerabilities and uncertainty. How do we handle it? Well, again, agility has been the great realization that I've had over the last 2.5 years. And we were doing research on supply chain agility back in 2019, when it was something of a luxury to have greater flexibility and speed in your supply chain. Going into pandemic, if you had agility, you actually saw tremendous opportunity, tremendous business growth opportunity by virtue of being able to accommodate changing, growing demand. Notice I point out that agility means not getting boxed in, having options within a realm of possibility. You'll hear me sometimes use the term degrees of freedom. All right, we could stay the course, or we could take on another option. It could be options in terms of our suppliers. It could be options in terms of our customers, our transportation service providers. Finding options, and not necessarily putting them to work, but recognizing what they are. And not just putting full faith in the relationships that we have. It doesn't mean you walk away from relationships. It just means you entertain some other possibilities. Have that creative exercise before you need to call upon it. So as I've come to appreciate, agility is a very viable and affordable form of resilience. So as mentioned, we've been doing work on this for quite some time. Some of my colleagues back at UT came up with this definition. Supply chain agility represents a company's ability to quickly adjust tactics and operations within its supply chain. And they went further to identify these 5 dimensions. And maybe where you're seated there, you can be thinking, okay, how are we doing across these 5 things? Alertness, the ability to quickly detect changes, both opportunities and threats. Accessibility, the ability to quickly access relevant data. Decisiveness, taking that data and then making decisions quickly, confidently. And then we get into the 2 operational areas where execution is key. The swiftness, ability to implement those decisions quickly, and then the flexibility, ability to modify the range of tactics and operations to the extent needed. And what we found is that you really, if you want to leverage supply chain agility, business agility, you need all 5. You need to be able to detect what's going on and then ultimately execute confidently. A lot of different ways to get there. I call this the agility menu. There's some things that you can do within your 4 walls. I'll be happy to share this presentation, so you don't need to be memorizing any of this. There's not a test afterwards or anything, but I just want to point out there are a lot of things you can do within your 4 walls. You can embrace technologies. You can create a more nimble organization. You certainly want to have better visibility upstream and downstream in your supply chains. You want to work with your suppliers and customers, yes, but also your logistics service providers to recognize that. And there's some things you can do, obviously, as pointed out, with regard to your suppliers and customers, respectively, to be more agile. One solution that many people are speaking of, and I've already kind of shot this down in my earlier comments, is the notion of regionalizing supply chains, the reshoring and nearshoring. I do believe it's going to happen, but it's going to be measured in decades before we see more regional supply chains. We're going to continue to be very much dependent, yes, on low-cost country sourcing to feed our supply chains and also to capitalize on those. As I think about your markets, you're going to continue to have robust markets overseas and in many cases these low-cost countries to process your raw materials into finished goods. So I do think it could begin in earnest, and we're seeing that it's starting to maybe, but it takes a long time to reshuffle the supply chain deck. Frankly, a lot more pain is going to have to be experienced before this happens. And I also think it's going to happen on an inter-industry basis, and that's where associations like this are key, is that it's going to be a rallying within industries and across industries to make much headway here. And yes, there will probably need to be some government action. There's already been some, and there'll probably need to be more in order to level the playing field across these markets. Also, what we came to realize is that you can't just rely on people to work harder to achieve supply chain agility. We need to embrace technologies, and the term digitalization is taking our industry by storm. I've been at a couple of big industry meetings over the last couple of weeks, and if digitalization was a drinking game, I never would have made it to Cleveland. I'd be stuck in Chicago, where I was last hearing the term digitalization from every speaker talking about how they needed to digitalize their supply chains. And I did think, what does that mean? Well, it means seeing, thinking, and acting differently. It means embracing advanced technologies to help us to see things. I mentioned the end-to-end supply chain visibility earlier, trying to understand what's going on, not only at our customers, but customers, all the way out to end users, also understanding what's going on upstream back to raw material extraction. And so be expecting your customers to provide you with better end-to-end visibility, and that's where transparency is going to come into play as well, not just quality and quantity, but integrity in the products you're bringing forward. Thinking, machine learning, artificial intelligence, all the rage, and if you're not employing these tools, you need to start experimenting. You need to start understanding where you can employ these technologies that can help us to connect seemingly unrelated data points, things that human logic just doesn't simply recognize. And so that's the value of employing these sort of technologies. And certainly on the acting side, attributed largely to labor shortages and labor challenges, we're going to figure out ways to make the work better, yes, faster, more productive by virtue of incorporating autonomous operations. We see it in distribution, we see it in manufacturing, we're going to see it all the way up and down the supply chain. Okay, so just kind of some closing implications for hardwood supply chains. Hey, I don't mean to rain on the parade here, but all business cycles come to an end. I'm always asking, is there a recession? We will inevitably, at some point, have a recession. Was it going to be before the end of this year, early next year? I don't know. I don't really think so in terms of a general economy recession. If so, I don't think it's going to be particularly harsh or long-standing, but at some point we will, because all business cycles come to an end. So you might sock away some money for a rainy day. That said, hey, the coalition, before I came on stage, they were hitting you up. Hey, I'm a big believer that rising waters lifts all boats, and so to the extent that you can participate in elevating your industry and creating that brand with consumers, that's going to help you weather these storms. Leverage tight capacity market for stronger long-term relationships with customers. Again, they've probably been very demanding of you to the extent that you can back up commitments that you're making to the market. Try to lock in, particularly for some headwinds that we might face down the road. You'll really benefit if you've locked in some really good, tight relationships with valuable customers. Do the same thing upstream with your suppliers and vendors. Be a good friend, particularly to those contested, those in-demand vendors, logistics service providers, and others to ensure that you have coverage. Look for opportunities to gain agility, those degrees of freedom I mentioned earlier in your business and your larger supply chain. Transparency. I came to this meeting expecting to hear about transparency. I know this is an industry that's laden with fraud from international sources, a lot of substitutions and illegal timbering activities taking place. And so, again, I think anything you can do to rally as a group to underscore the integrity of the product, build that brand is going to be very beneficial. And manufacturers are looking for it because their customers, consumers, are looking for that kind of integrity. Sustainability goes hand in hand with that. Okay? And then finally, your people will continue to be your biggest asset and differentiator. I've been able to offer that insight not only to this setting, this industry, but to anywhere I'm going, because I'm a big believer that that's going to be true across the board. Also, I'm getting the question quite often, how do we contend with inflation? And I say, get a handle on where you make money, where you lose money. Don't assume that all business is good business. A survey that we did years ago at Ohio State found that only 14% of companies understood where they made money or lost money on a customer-by-customer basis. 86% kind of assumed that all business was good business, and that's a big fallacy. Okay, you got to be savvy. You got to understand where you make money, where you lose money, customer by customer. Also, perhaps product line by product line. Ideally, both. So manage top lines, those customer relationships and sales, and bottom lines, your operations and expenses with purpose. Be intentional based upon actual numbers. All right, so with that, I think I've pretty much exhausted my time. I thank you. There's my contact information. Also encourage you to listen to the Tennessee on Supply Chain Management podcast I co-host. I've got a couple of questions, minutes to field questions, and I'll be sticking around as well. All right, thank you. Down, you gonna join me?
Yeah, I'm just going to make sure I can see those hands way in the back, because I got the eagle eye, moose hunter. I can see far back there. Any questions for Thomas?
Yeah, just to repeat Steve's question, he's asking about my outlook on India with 1.4 billion, similar economics, but lacking the infrastructure. And that's the big holdup in terms of developing India as both a supply market and also a customer market. Something I'm anticipating is some element of foreign direct investment that's going to help go well beyond how India can develop its infrastructure on its own. Of course, China, just said, hey, this is what we're going to do. It's been 4 decades in the making, and we see the result of that. It's going to be a long road to get there, but I do think FDI is going to help make some inroads and develop both the supply and customer market of India. So it's very promising.
Any other questions?
Take some time.
That means you agree with everything he just said.
I don't think that's true.
Nothing.
All right. Well, hey, like I said, I'll be around throughout the day. Just grab me if you, again, have a question or just want to back up something I offered. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.